Welcome back to Government and Politics in the United States. In this section, we're going to talk about why we study this at all. Why do you want to study politics or political science? I say there are three different reasons. First, because you want to understand the rules of the American political system. Secondly, because you want to use those rules which you learn to increase the chances of getting what you want. And thirdly, to begin to change the rules. In order to use the rules, you need to understand what they mean. If there's something that you want to have happen, like lowering taxes or dealing with pollution control, then you've got to make sure you understand what the rules are, or else you're not going to be able to apply those rules to achieve your goals. And then if you want to change the rules, you have to both understand them and know how to use them in order to influence their change in the future. We'll be talking about these three separate topics throughout the entire semester, and in fact, if you look at your syllabus, you'll notice that the class is broken up into these three sections. And so we're not going to try to tackle this in this one particular section. This is something we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about. But I want to give you a sense of where we're going to go with these so that you understand what the class is. The first part, understanding the rules, I've labeled Founding a Political Nation. And we're going to be studying quite a bit of the class within this one section. And you'll see that we have a few chapters which are corresponding to this section: Power and Citizenship in the United States, the U.S. Elite and the U.S. Masses, the Framing of the U.S. Constitution and the Distribution of Power, and Federalism. These are all textbook chapters which are in your book, and you can look them up. If they're not 1, 2, 3, and 4, then you can find them easily in the index, but I believe they're there. You can also find these in your syllabus if you're not sure when you're supposed to be reading them. So refer back to your syllabus to make sure that you have the right dates and the right chapters to correspond with what we're talking about at any given time. So let's start Power and Citizenship in American Politics. This is the first chapter in your book, and we're going to be talking about quite a few different topics which are outside of the book material in this section. So you'll see a lot of things from your chapter and a lot of things that aren't from your chapter, which are going to come in separate lectures that talk about this power and citizenship idea and what does it mean to be part of our political system. So for this section, we want to answer the question, what is politics? A couple of key terms that I want to go over. One is, what is politics, what is government, and what is power? Politics, government, and power, they seem like things which really shouldn't take us that long to discuss. They're ideas that we all have some concept of what they are, but the reason that they're up here is that we really want to go back and discover what we mean by these things. Imagine you're trying to explain these topics to people who really have no idea what they are. How would you explain them, and what types of baggage are you bringing with you to the definitions of these things? So first, let's talk about politics. When we hear politics, a couple of things immediately spring to mind. For some of us, it's the political process in and of itself that involves senators, it involves initiatives, it involves politicians, for example. That's Mayor Gene Kwan there of Oakland. We think about Prop 8 and the way people vote up and down on different measures. We think about our president and also about our president's campaign and about electioneering. And we think about voting, and we think about the other things that have to do with elections and people that have to do with elections and that electioneering process. Also, when we think of politics, we think of hot button issues. Just think of the things that generally you don't want to talk about around a dinner table, particularly with people you don't know. So I have a couple of examples of them here. The pro-life versus pro-choice debate, the debate over health care reform or medical marijuana, the ideas of whether or not what we're doing in our war activities, our overseas activities with the military are things that should happen. Think about if you're going over to meet the in-laws for the first time, these topics that you wouldn't want to come up. We think about these as political topics. And those are things which are brought to mind often as well when we're talking about what politics has to do with our lives, or when we're thinking about politics in general. So what we want to do today, we have actually a very modest and yet monumental goal for this section, which is to erase your perception of what politics are. And that's mostly because a lot of times we have a very negative perception of what politics are. Anything political, a lot of people tend to shy away from it. They either don't know what it is or they don't like it at all because it draws to mind politicians whom they don't like, or a political process they believe that was ugly, or a particularly contentious fight over an issue. And they don't like to think about these things because they generally think about it as something which is negative and not part of what they want to spend their time on. Generally, politicians themselves aren't liked. Ironically, there's a study that shows that people like their own particular representatives, but in terms of the legislative body as a whole, they believe it to be corrupt. They believe politicians spend too much money, they do too many backhanded deals, they have all of these things going on which they don't believe to be legitimate. And so we want to take a look at all of that too. And of course, about government as a whole, people have negative perceptions often about government, about the abuse of power and the abuse of funds in the government. And so we want to erase all of that, at least temporarily. I'm not saying you can't hold your own views of what the government is and what the government does and what politics is and what politics does. But for the moment, let's talk theoretically about politics. And so we want to first give us a clean slate to work with in terms of these definitions and what this means so that we can move forward in order to study how these things should become, what these things should become. So before we move on to the next lecture, I'd like you just to take a minute and consider your perceptions of politics. You might want to just jot down some notes of what you think politics is, or things that come to mind for you. And when you're thinking about this, maybe what you thought of when you thought of taking this class. What did you think this class was going to be about? What did you think you would learn? What were the things that maybe you were a little concerned about that maybe we would speak of that would make you feel uncomfortable? And I say this not so that we can necessarily wipe the slate clean, but so that we can bring these things to mind and take away the negative connotations of them and understand that that's what we're carrying with us into the study of politics, so that we can temporarily put them on hold, erase them from our study for a minute, so that we can understand the background of these particular concepts, and then see how they apply to the different thoughts that we had brought in the first place.